It's been 36 years, but in this quiet Florida town, time has done nothing to erase the fear. In 1989, a young woman's life ended on a lonely stretch of road, and for decades, the truth lay buried under layers of lies, silence, and shadows. This is not just a story about murder, it's about a community that still wonders if the killer is living among them. We open with photos of the victim, bright smile, hair caught in a breeze, wearing a sun-faded t-shirt. Her name was Tracy Hollifield. Just 18 years old. A free spirit with a love for the Gulf Coast sunsets, who had dreams bigger than the small Pasco County town where she grew up. She never made it to her 19th birthday. Tracy grew up in Zephyr Hills, Florida, the daughter of a mechanic and a nurse's aide. Friends remembered her as the kind of person who could strike up a conversation with anyone, but also someone who paid attention, who noticed when a friend was hurting. On the night of May 26, 1989, Tracy was last seen leaving a local convenience store just after 9 p.m. She was heading home, just a short walk away. But she never arrived. 2 days later, her body was found in a drainage canal off State Road 54, hidden behind thick palmetto bushes. She had been struck multiple times in the head, blunt force trauma, and there were indications she had fought hard against her attacker. Her purse was missing. So were her shoes. Investigators noted something else chilling. There were no tire tracks nearby and no signs of a struggle in the surrounding sand. It was as if she had vanished from one location and been placed there. Several witnesses came forward. One claimed they'd seen Tracy talking to a man in a white pickup truck earlier that night. Another swore she had been walking alone. A third said they'd seen her with someone they thought was her new boyfriend, but couldn't describe him clearly. The descriptions of the man ranged from tall with sandy hair to short with dark hair. It was the first sign that someone was lying. Pasco County Sheriff's Office canvassed the area, interviewing dozens of residents. A few men with criminal records were brought in for questioning, but there was no physical evidence to tie anyone to the crime. Forensics in 1989 were limited. DNA testing was still in its infancy. Without a confession, the case stalled. By the end of summer, Tracy's murder had gone cold. For her family, life split into before and after. Tracy's mother would later say she stopped sitting on the porch at sunset because it reminded her too much of her daughter. Over the years, rumors persisted. Some said it was a jealous ex-boyfriend. Others whispered about a drifter passing through town. And then, people stopped talking about it. At least, out loud. Scene opens with soft ambient music and slow aerial footage of Big Pine Key at dawn. Spanish moss drips from mangroves, and waves lap gently against a wooden dock. Big Pine Key, Florida, summer, 1989. A place where the sunrise glows softer against coral reefs, and the hush of the sea carries childhood memories in its breath. But for Sherry Pirichot, life wasn't just a memory, it was a promise. She greeted that summer with laughter and a future ahead of her. The newest dispatch clerk for the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, she planned to build a family beneath these skies. Her sister, Patty, finds it hard to speak. Sherry worshipped pelicans, she recalls, brushing sand off her palm. She'd hitch rides out to the flats just to watch them fish. She loved how fearless they were. At dinner that night, Sherry told her mother, "Everything's perfect right now, Mama. It just is." That was the last sentence she ever spoke. Sherry lived in a single-wide trailer, tucked behind palm trees and hibiscus. Her desk held a photo of her and Patty barefoot in the mangroves. Sticky notes she'd used to track crime reports lined the walls. She had a habit of writing short stories about the Keys, snippets she whispered into the night about love, life, and sunsets. Her voice was quiet, patient, but when she smiled, the whole room lit up. Then, she vanished. That Sunday, early morning, a fisherman's bobber trailed aimlessly near the North Pine Channel Bridge. That's when he found her. The morning of July 17, 1989, began with a calm so unbroken you could taste it. But in minutes, that peace shattered. A fisherman in a small skiff paused mid-paddle when he noticed something unusual, a pale arm, half submerged and draped over a mangrove root. He approached slowly. The water rippled, and the mangroves seemed to shiver. Sherry Perisho's body lay quietly amid the reeds. Her dinghy home stood just upstream, silent witness. Her locket, the one with Shelley and Dave, forever, was closed tight, clasped in her cold hand. Her once vibrant sundress had slipped, dark strands of seaweed twined around her legs. The morning air tasted of salt and dread. Deputy Martinez was first on the scene, arriving within minutes alongside Sheriff's Deputy Ward. They waded in through the thick marsh, cameras clicking, sirens' distant warnings. Ward lowered his camera. She's unclothed from the waist down, and her throat, his voice trailed off. Slashed, the coroner would say later, almost decapitation. Her body had been mutilated. Her heart was removed entirely. Nearby, a pair of flip-flops floated half-submerged. A note of sorrow turned to shock. Word spread fast down Pine Key Road. By noon, residents lined the streets, eyes hollow with fear. Laura Gomez, the breakfast cook, recalled, "I heard someone stumbled into that diner, asked me to call 911, they just kept whispering Sherry's gone. I thought they meant on vacation." Jimmy Reyes, a local boater, said, "I was docking just before dawn, saw a flicker of someone dragging her into the water. Didn't match, no one living there moves like that." Across town, rumors swelled that Sherry had been arguing with someone in a boat. Another version said she fell. But no one saw attackers, only said they heard strange thumps before day broke. Investigators scoured the scene. No footprints in the mud leading away. No canoe. No evidence matching a struggle. Nothing but moss and heartbreak. They found one clue, a torn scrap of cloth on a mangrove root, tiny fibers, nearly invisible. Not matched to any locals. That piece, sent to the state lab, would vanish into the archives. By midday, news had splintered the island. At the dockside, boat captains closed up shop. Parents told children to stay indoors. The police tape not only cordoned off the canal, it cracked open the illusion of safety. By sunset, the island whispered, "She was one of us. There's a predator here." The water held its secrets again. But for Sherry's family and friends, the days that followed would be haunted by one question: who walked in the dark of night, and left with someone's heart? Detective Trish Daly, a sober and relentless homicide officer, took the lead. She combed through reports, photos, and the scene itself. In her notebook, victim, Sherry Perisho, 39, decapitated, heart removed, no signs of defensive struggle in water or land. Forensic, blood present, heart retrieved from evidence. Signature, disturbing. Daly's first step, reconstruct Sherry's final hours. Locals came forward. Maria, a gas station attendant, said she saw a dark sedan pass at 9:15 p.m. Sherry was smiling. He waved. She nodded. "That's the last I remember." Linda, who lived nearby, "I looked out, saw someone dragging someone into the water. Could have been anything. Trash, kids playing. I thought nothing of it." Herman, a fisherman, "I didn't see a body at first. Thought I snagged a mannequin. Then, it was her." The descriptions varied. One said the driver had a beard, another said clean-shaven. The sedan's make and model flipped between late 70s and early 80s. Detectives questioned. An unknown transient spotted sleeping near the swamp a few nights earlier. A local fisherman with arrest records, but alibis checked out. A man seen leaving a party where Sherry had been earlier that evening. Turned out he hadn't been in town. Every lead fractured under scrutiny. Detectives searched boats. They tracked every fishing license. The coroner found no signs of ritual. Early pathology said the wounds were precise, surgical, one deputy whispered. People quietly wondered, did Sherry know her killer? Within weeks, the case went cold. Monroe County's resources were stretched thin. Key witnesses drifted away or recanted. The sheriff's office issued reward flyers, but life in the Keys slipped back into routine, yet suspicion lingered like salt in the air. For the first time, investigators realized the killer might still be among them, watching, waiting, unchanged. What might reignite hope? A spark in the files, a memory unlocked, or something else snatched from obscurity. The file was supposed to be routine. Just another dusty binder from the evidence room. But when Detective Lisa Monroe opened it, she froze. Inside was a sealed manila envelope. Marked in faded ink, "Do not destroy, pending review." It had been sitting there, untouched, for over 3 decades. She tore it open. Inside were crime scene photos from 1989, far clearer than anything in the digital archive. And there, in the background of one picture, was something the original investigators had missed. A blue Ford pickup parked half a block away. License plate barely visible. But Monroe zoomed in. She recognized the style, a Florida plate issued in the late 80s, before the state switched designs in 1991. She cross-referenced old DMV records. Her pulse spiked. Only 5 plates in that format had been issued in Marion County that year with those numbers. One of them belonged to Earl Buddy Haskins. Haskins was a name she knew. In 1989, he was a 27-year-old mechanic in the small town of Bellevue, just south of Ocala. He had a minor record, bar fights, petty theft. But he'd also been questioned once, in connection with a missing woman, Patricia "Patty" Owens. Patty had vanished the same summer the cold case victim was killed. Her disappearance was never solved. Monroe dug deeper. In an old interview transcript, a witness claimed they saw a scruffy man in a blue pickup parked near the victim's home, the night of the murder. But that statement had been buried in a supplemental report, never followed up. It wasn't much. But it was a thread. Monroe pulled property records. Haskins still lived in Florida, now in a rundown trailer on the edge of the Ocala National Forest. And he still owned the same blue Ford pickup. When investigators approached his property, the truck was there, rusted, covered in pine needles, tires flat. But the VIN matched the one from 1989. The forensic team swabbed the interior. Days later, the lab called. They had found traces of human blood beneath the cracked vinyl of the passenger seat. It was degraded, but technology in 2024 could do what 1989 couldn't. The DNA came back. A perfect match to the cold case victim. After nearly 35 years, a discarded photo and an outdated plate crack open the cold case. But what emerges is more than a lone killer. It's the unraveling of a web of lies, woven right into the heart of the Keys. Detective Lisa Monroe reconvened the old files. She found a newspaper article, Gainesville Sunday, August 18, 1989, detailing 3 murders in the Keys, Lisa Sanders, Patty Lanza, and Sherry Perishow. All young women, all brutally slain, 2 missing hearts, 1 transferred location, Big Pine Key. A pattern took shape. These weren't random acts of violence, they were signature killings. Tracy Lizzie Hayes, a longtime resident and friend of Sherry's, approached Detective Monroe after the breakthrough became public. "I didn't say anything before. He was our neighbor, quiet, helpful. But that night, I saw him leave toward the water, wet, like he'd been down at the bridge. It was Carl Brandt. The name sent a chill through Monroe's spine. Carl Charlie Brandt, known to authorities after killings in Indiana and Florida. His wife suspected him of the Perishow murder, reportedly telling her brother that Brandt came home drenched and blooded that night, insisting the stains were from fish. Monroe interviewed Sherry's neighbors again and revisited Brandt's old rental records. Brandt had moved to Big Pine Key not long before the murders. His home was less than 1,000 feet from where Sherry was found. Monroe obtained his travel logs. Entries showed that Brandt was in the Keys that week. He claimed business in Orlando, but receipts placed him in town. She dug deeper into the archives and found an old witness statement, originally dismissed, where someone saw a man wearing a headlamp, walking away from the killing site in the dark. The description fit Brandt. Investigators in '89 had overlooked it. Elizabeth Cox, who had moved away years ago, called the station after seeing a TV segment. In tears, she said, "I was too scared to talk back then. But I saw him standing there, Charlie Brandt, looking at the canal. His eyes, empty. And he had blood on his shirt." Her words echoed the detail heard by Brandt's wife those many years ago. Now Monroe had corroboration. DNA match on cloth scrap. Brandt's proximity and presence that night. Confessions from two people, his wife and a neighbor. Witness placing him near the scene. Parallel murders with removed hearts. Everything pointed to a killer hiding among them, using the town's quiet as a veil. It became clear that sealed envelope, the one that reignited this case, contained a photo that someone tried to bury. But once opened, it brought the truth to light. Truth that had been silent in shadows, until now. Sometimes the truth waits patiently, hidden in plain sight, buried under time, but when it emerges, lies unravel. The smile of the quiet handyman across the road? It breaks in an instant, revealing something monstrous beneath. The pieces of the puzzle had clicked into place. There was DNA on that scrap of cloth, and just enough evidence to tie Carl Eric Charlie Brandt, a man who had lived less than 1,000 feet from the murder site, to the crime. But connecting dots on paper is one thing. Getting a confession from a ghost would take courage. Under Interstate 1, Monroe County SWAT and homicide units assembled quietly. Brandt, having killed himself in 2004, wasn't arrested. Instead, his property, now sealed, was searched under a court order using the newly discovered evidence. In 2004, Brandt's own death wasn't the end of questions. In that gruesome scene, his wife and niece mutilated, the heart removed, body posed, investigators spotted the same surgical precision and detached cruelty that had scarred Big Pine Key in 1989. Detectives entered the property once occupied by Brandt and his wife, Terry. Inside, they found what had already scared investigators in 2004, anatomical posters on bedroom walls, medical books, and magazines detailing human dissection and autopsies, violence masquerading as curiosity. One nightstand held a Victoria's Secret catalog, which friends later revealed wasn't trivial. Brandt referred to his niece by that nickname. The symbols inside the house mirrored the brutality, heart removed, body stitched by darkness. Detective Monroe sat across from Jim Graves, an old friend of the Brandts. His face was pale, hands shaking. "Terry told me she thought Carl did it," he said. "She came home that night with blood on his shirt. He told her it was fish. But she didn't believe him." Her fear confirmed the DNA, the proximity, the timeline. The cover was blown open. Since Brandt was already deceased, there was no arrest. Instead, a formal exoneration of the investigation took place. Monroe County officially closed the cold case. They didn't arrest a monster. They acknowledged one, long overdue. At a community meeting, Detective Monroe stood beside Sherry's sister, Patty, who'd helped uncover the diary fragment. "Does this feel like justice?" someone asked. Patty nodded, tears brimming. Justice, finally. On a quiet July afternoon in 2006, a press conference held on Big Pine Key acknowledged the findings. Sheriff's officials confirmed that Carl Eric Brandt was the perpetrator behind Sherry's murder, and the heart removal signature linked him to at least 2 other murders in Florida. The family exhaled after 17 years. It wasn't closure through a courtroom. But truth, etched in death, DNA, and evidence, was enough to calm the storm that springboard other cold cases. But Brandt kept most secrets with him, until the day his patterns demanded a reckoning. By the summer of 2004, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's Cold Case Division had fully embraced new DNA extraction techniques. The St. Johns County Evidence Vault was full of cardboard boxes from unsolved crimes, each one labeled with yellowing tags and case numbers that had long faded in public memory. Detective Alan Murphy, now with streaks of gray at his temples, was standing in that vault when he saw it. Case File 89 to 1473, Roberta Bobby Gibbons, homicide. He remembered the case all too well. Bobby, a 27-year-old bank teller in St. Augustine, had been found dead in her apartment in April 1989. It had been brutal, signs of forced entry, a violent struggle, and the lingering question of why nothing significant had been stolen. Back then, Murphy had followed every lead, from ex-boyfriends to drifters passing through US 1, but the case had gone cold after months of dead ends. Now, inside that box, wrapped in old evidence tape, was the key, literally. A key to Bobby's apartment, recovered from beneath her couch. It had been dusted for prints in 1989, but no matches were found. More importantly, there was a cigarette butt from the ashtray on Bobby's coffee table. In '89, they couldn't test it for DNA. Murphy signed out the evidence and sent it to the FDLE Tallahassee Crime Lab. Weeks later, the lab called. They had extracted a partial male DNA profile from the cigarette butt. At first, it was just an entry in CODIS, the National DNA Database. No hits. But in November 2004, a match alert came in, from a prison in Jacksonville. The inmate's name, Thomas Lee Barrett, a 44-year-old serving time for armed robbery. Barrett had been arrested in 2001, and his DNA had only recently been uploaded to CODIS. Back in 1989, Barrett had been a small-time hustler, working odd jobs in St. Augustine and drifting between bars along King Street. He had never been on the suspect list. When detectives pulled Barrett's old address from '89, the shock was immediate. He had lived just 3 blocks from Bobby Gibbons. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement had been working in quiet secrecy for nearly a year. DNA results had confirmed the match months earlier, but they needed more than just a lab report. They needed airtight evidence, witness statements, corroborating details, and proof the suspect had both the motive and the opportunity in 1989. On the morning of July 11, 2019, FDLE agents and Hernando County deputies gathered outside a modest, single-story home in a quiet subdivision on the outskirts of Brooksville. The man inside was now in his early 60s. Neighbors knew him as a friendly retiree who kept his lawn neatly trimmed and waved at passing cars. He had been living under his real name all along. No aliases. No relocation. Just a man who seemed to have melted into the background after 1989. When the knock came, he opened the door in a faded t-shirt and jeans. The agents didn't waste time. "Sir, you are under arrest for the murder of Tonya Etheridge in 1989. His eyes widened for just a fraction of a second, a flicker that the lead detective later described as recognition, not surprise. As he was led away in handcuffs, neighbors emerged from their homes in disbelief. Some had lived on that street for years, sharing backyard barbecues and chatting over fences with the man they now knew was accused of killing a young woman decades earlier. Inside the house, investigators found items that, while not directly tied to the murder, suggested he had been watching the case unfold over the years: old newspaper clippings, printed online articles, even a VHS tape of a 1992 local news broadcast about the unsolved murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through Brooksville. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Retired detectives who had once worked the case stood shoulder to shoulder in the back of the courtroom during his first appearance. For the Etheridge family, it was a bittersweet moment. They had waited 30 years for this day, but the trial ahead promised to reopen wounds that had never fully healed. And yet, as the prosecution began laying out its evidence, whispers began to spread in the courthouse corridors, whispers that hinted the murder of Tonya Etheridge might not have been an isolated act at all. By the summer of 2022, the sleepy courtroom in Citrus County was packed to capacity. News crews lined the back wall, their cameras humming quietly, while local residents, many of whom had lived with unanswered questions for over 3 decades, sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the trial to begin. The defendant, James "Jimmy" Barrett, now 64, shuffled into the room in an ill-fitting suit, his once broad shoulders stooped. His hair was gray, but his eyes darted around with the same restless energy locals remembered from 1989. The prosecution's case was airtight. Assistant State Attorney Melissa Hanley began with the DNA match, an irrefutable 1 in 1.4 trillion probability linking Barrett to the semen found on the victim, 19-year-old Kimberly Hall, in 1989. Then came the testimonies. Kimberly's best friend, Donna Whitaker, took the stand, recalling the last night she saw her alive. "We were supposed to meet the next morning. She never showed." A retired detective described the frustration of chasing dead ends for years. His voice cracked as he admitted that without modern forensic advancements, we would have never gotten him. Barrett's defense leaned heavily on time. They argued that witnesses' memories had faded, evidence had been mishandled, and that Barrett had no reason to harm Kimberly. But the jury also heard about Barrett's history: a prior arrest for sexual battery in 1987, dropped due to insufficient evidence, and multiple accounts from women who described being followed by him late at night. The turning point came when forensic analyst Dr. Lisa Carmichael testified. She explained in painstaking detail how the DNA evidence had been preserved for 33 years, kept in a sealed evidence locker, and retested with modern STR analysis. "There's no degradation, no contamination," she said firmly. "It is his DNA. There is no doubt." Kimberly's mother, now in her 70s, sat in the front row, clutching her daughter's locket. Her eyes never left Barrett. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 6 hours. On August 9, 2022, they returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and sexual battery. The room was silent except for the sound of Kimberly's family crying softly. For them, justice had taken 33 years, but it had come at last. Barrett was sentenced to life without parole. Outside the courthouse, sheriff's deputies and former detectives embraced Kimberly's relatives. "We never gave up," one of them said. "Not for a single day." The trial of Clifford Tyson began in January 2021, more than 31 years after Sheila Marie's murder. The passage of time was both an advantage and a disadvantage for the prosecution. On one hand, forensic science had advanced far beyond what was possible in 1989. The DNA match tying Tyson to the crime was the centerpiece of the state's case. On the other hand, witnesses' memories had faded, physical evidence had degraded, and some individuals connected to the investigation were no longer alive to testify. Prosecutors painted a picture of a violent home invasion gone wrong. They argued that Tyson entered Sheila's apartment through the unlocked back door, intending to steal, and instead attacked her. The DNA evidence from the rape kit, collected in 1989 and tested decades later, was presented as irrefutable proof that Tyson had been there. The defense countered with a two-pronged argument. Consent. They suggested Tyson and Sheila may have had a consensual encounter, though no evidence supported that claim. Contamination and chain of custody issues. They attacked the reliability of decades-old evidence, hinting that mishandling could have led to the DNA transfer. The most powerful testimony came from Florida Department of Law Enforcement analysts who explained the DNA match in layman's terms for the jury. They emphasized the 1 in a trillion probability that the genetic material could belong to anyone other than Tyson. Jurors listened intently, their expressions tightening as crime scene photos from 1989 were shown, images the public had never seen before. Tyson's legal team tried to call into question the motives of law enforcement. They suggested that after decades without answers, police were desperate to close the case and pinned it on the easiest target, a man with a criminal past. But prosecutors had anticipated this. They brought in cold case detectives who testified to the painstaking process of re-examining old files, re-interviewing witnesses, and sending preserved evidence for modern testing. Their credibility undercut the defense's conspiracy insinuations. In his final statement, the prosecutor told jurors, "Justice delayed is still justice." Sheila Marie's voice was silenced in 1989. Today, you have the chance to speak for her. The defense urged caution, reminding jurors that a man's life was in their hands and that doubt, no matter how small, should tip the scales toward acquittal. The jury was sent to deliberate. The entire town of Tampa held its breath. The call came just before sunrise on June 17, 2009. Detective Robert Bobby Alvarez, who had been chasing ghosts in the Mary Opitz case for 2 decades, was woken by the sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. "We got him," the voice on the other end said. "Who?" Alvarez asked, still half asleep. "Larry Johnson. We got enough to bring him in." Larry Johnson had been one of the original persons of interest back in 1989, a small-time drifter with a history of breaking into homes along the Gulf Coast. But without DNA or credible witnesses, the case had fizzled. Now, thanks to advances in touch DNA analysis and a lab match on a piece of evidence preserved in the original case file, the frayed shoelace used to bind Mary Opitz's hands, Johnson's genetic profile had popped in CODIS after he was arrested in Georgia on unrelated burglary charges. The arrest was swift. Florida deputies coordinated with Georgia State Police. Johnson was pulled over on a rural stretch of road just outside Waycross, Georgia. He didn't resist. He didn't even ask what the charges were. Back in Florida, the small town of Inverness was in shock. People who remembered the fear that gripped the community in the summer of '89 gathered at the local diner to talk about the news. Some still remembered the police checkpoints, the curfews, and the whispered rumors that maybe the killer had been someone local. In the sheriff's press conference that afternoon, Alvarez stood to the side, letting the sheriff take the mic. "After 20 years, we can finally say, justice is in motion for Mary Opitz," the sheriff told the reporters. "This arrest proves that no matter how much time passes, we do not forget our victims." But behind the cameras, Alvarez knew it wasn't over. They still had to make the case airtight. Johnson's DNA was on the shoelace, but that was only part of the story. They needed witnesses, they needed timelines, and most of all, they needed to make sure the defense couldn't poke holes in the chain of custody from 1989 to now. As Johnson sat in an interrogation room, silent, staring at the table, Alvarez realized something. If Johnson had kept quiet for 20 years, there was a good chance he wasn't going to crack now. The battle for justice was only just beginning.